In a move that has reignited global tensions over nuclear proliferation, Iran announced that it is withdrawing from an agreement that would have allowed international inspectors to resume monitoring its nuclear sites. The decision, confirmed by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, comes at a moment of heightened uncertainty surrounding the status of Iran's enriched uranium program. It also marks the latest setback in what has been months of diplomatic deadlock between Tehran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. For many global actors, from the United States to Europe and across the Middle East, the suspension of inspections raises fears that the window for transparency is closing and that the potential for another regional war is inching closer. Iran's move was announced just hours after the IAEA Board of Governors passed a resolution demanding that Tehran, without delay, provide information about its enriched uranium stockpile and grant access to its nuclear sites. The decision cannot be understood without revisiting the events of June, when Israel launched a sweeping 12-day military campaign targeting Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure, an operation the United States briefly joined. The Natanz enrichment facility, long at the center of global concern, was one of several sites struck. President Trump claimed shortly afterward that Iran's nuclear enrichment program had been obliterated, implying that the strikes had eliminated Tehran's ability to continue its nuclear activities. But regional officials, analysts, and nuclear experts have questioned the accuracy of that assertion. While the attacks undoubtedly inflicted significant physical damage, they may also have hardened Iran's resolve to pursue more secretive nuclear development, especially as trust between Iran and international institutions deteriorates. Since the attacks, the IAEA has not been permitted to enter Iranian nuclear facilities. Rafael Grossi, head of the agency, has publicly expressed concern over what he describes as renewed activity at some sites, even though Iran does not appear to be actively enriching uranium. The distinction matters. Uranium enriched at low levels is usable for energy production, but high levels are critical for a nuclear weapon. Grossi and other experts argue that without inspections, the world has no way of knowing whether Iran's stockpile has truly been destroyed, as Tehran claims, or whether sensitive materials remain intact. Iran maintains that its nuclear program remains peaceful and that any claims of renewed enrichment are politically motivated. But the IAEA's inability to verify even basic information has caused an information vacuum that fuels worst-case assumptions in Western and regional capitals. Iran's refusal to allow inspections is rooted not only in the aftermath of the June attacks, but also in the diplomatic standoff that preceded them. In the weeks before Israel's operation, the IAEA passed a resolution accusing Iran of failing to comply with its nuclear non-proliferation obligations. Iranian officials argue that the resolution provided political justification for Israel to attack the next day. As a result, Tehran adopted a defensive posture, suspending cooperation with the UN watchdog in July and questioning whether inspectors could safely access bombed facilities without the risk of sabotage or espionage. These claims were met with skepticism internationally, but they became central to Iran's argument that it could not accept the return of inspectors without security guarantees. In September, a glimmer of progress emerged when Iran and the IAEA met in Cairo and reached an understanding on resuming inspections. But that progress evaporated quickly when European nations moved in October to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. Tehran interpreted the sanctions as a sign that Europe, once viewed as a moderating force, had aligned itself with US and Israeli pressure campaigns. By Thursday, any remaining momentum collapsed when the IAEA's new resolution demanded immediate compliance. Instead of reopening its facilities, Iran withdrew from the Cairo agreement altogether, declaring the understanding terminated. For many observers, this sequence highlighted a cycle of mistrust. Diplomatic pressure provokes Iranian resistance, which then triggers harsher responses from the international community. Meanwhile, regional analysts have raised alarms that Iran may be working on nuclear activities at undeclared sites, particularly a location known as Pickax Mountain, believed by some experts to be the centerpiece of a new enrichment effort. Tehran has refused access to this facility and others not already declared, further deepening suspicions. While no verified evidence shows Iran producing weapons-grade uranium since the June attacks, the combination of secrecy, damaged oversight mechanisms, and a volatile regional environment has created a sense of unpredictability. Without inspections, Israel, which has repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to strike Iranian nuclear infrastructure, may choose to act again. Analysts warn that such a scenario could trigger a wider conflict across the Middle East, especially if the United States becomes involved once more. Complicating matters further is the expiration of the 2015 nuclear agreement, which had imposed strict limits on Iran's enrichment activities and established a robust inspection regime. With that deal now defunct and no replacement on the horizon, the international community lacks a formal framework for pressuring Iran or incentivizing compliance. European nations, led by France, continue to call for new talks. French Foreign Ministry spokesman Pascal Canfavreau reiterated that diplomatic engagement remains the preferred path, but acknowledged that progress is impossible without cooperation from Tehran and, critically, from Washington. The United States was engaged in nuclear negotiations with Iran when the June attacks occurred, but Iran now insists it will not negotiate without guarantees of non-aggression. Tehran also demands compensation for the damage inflicted during the airstrikes, terms Washington has categorically rejected. As these diplomatic fractures widen, the uncertainty surrounding Iran's remaining stockpile of highly enriched uranium deepens. Iran has repeatedly claimed that its stockpile was either destroyed or buried beneath rubble during the June bombings. But Rafael Grossi contradicted this narrative in a recent interview with the Financial Times, saying he believed that a majority of the stockpile survived. Without inspections, the IAEA cannot determine whether material exists, where it is stored, or how it might be used. This ambiguity is dangerous. The lack of verifiable information heightens the risk of miscalculation, whether by Iran, Israel, or the broader international community. It also leaves open the possibility that Iran could, if it chose to, accelerate enrichment activities without immediate detection. Ultimately, Iran's withdrawal from the inspections agreement reflects a broader erosion of trust between Tehran and the international community. Each side sees the other as responsible for the breakdown. Iran points to military attacks and political pressure, while Western nations argue that transparency is non-negotiable given Iran's past violations. What remains is a standoff defined by uncertainty, suspicion, and the absence of mechanisms that once kept the nuclear file stable. Whether diplomacy can regain momentum or whether the situation drifts toward renewed conflict depends largely on whether inspections, the backbone of nuclear accountability, can resume. Until then, the world is left navigating a dangerous gray zone, unsure of Iran's intentions, unclear about the fate of its uranium stockpile, and increasingly concerned that the next confrontation may already be taking shape.